Thank you very much. Grace, was that Grace Kennedy who was making the introduction there?
Yep.
Yes. Okay, thank you, Grace. Thanks for your leadership there. And I know Alejandro is not there, but I appreciate both of you and the work that you're doing. Alejandro has sent us the invitation, and I'm grateful that all of you took the time to come tonight. I'm really sorry that I can't be there. I am battling a bad head cold and a cough. Somehow during the 2 hours of the debate last night, I managed to suppress the cough. I took 2 steps off the stage and it came raging back for like the next 4 hours. So I'm still here in Atlanta, but I am grateful to be able to have the conversation with you long distance. So thanks for being patient and working with me on this. I will keep, I'll keep my opening words relatively brief. A lot of you saw the debate last night. I think there were a number of important issues raised. There were many important issues that were not. I think that I'll get to a couple of those, but I think the bottom line of what this all comes down to as you're considering who you plan to vote for in the upcoming primary, who you'd like to see as a Democratic nominee, you're looking at the differences between all of us as candidates, the different plans that we are offering forward, the different visions that we have. And I think really the question comes down to 2 things. Who can win in November of 2020? And just as, if not more importantly, who can actually bring people together both in Washington and across the country to be able to lead and implement these changes and actually solve problems. That's what it comes down to, solving problems. A lot of times we get paid lip service from politicians a lot during the campaigns and they get elected and then you wonder what happened to everything that was said. And so I think that focus on problem solving is essential as you are considering the decision that you have before you. This is something that I've been focused on throughout my time in Congress. I was elected in 2012, part of a large class of members elected. There were 84 of us, 50 Democrats, 34 Republicans. And I came in as a freshman Democrat with a very strong Republican majority, trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to solve these problems? How am I going to actually get things done? I was told when I got elected by some experienced Democrats, kind of Democratic operatives in Washington, that I shouldn't waste my time trying to pass legislation or offering amendments because Republicans wouldn't let it through. And that the best way that I could hope to make an impact through my seat in Congress is to use that platform, give speeches on the House floor, raise important issues, and then continue to fight for a Democratic majority, because only then would we be able to implement the kind of change that we need to see. I did not find that to be an acceptable answer. I asked the people of Hawaii for their trust and their confidence and their vote to actually work to get things done. And so I had to start immediately by figuring out, how do I build relationships with Republicans? The hyperpartisanship set in almost immediately after we got there. And a lot of it comes from the leadership of both parties, who are really just looking for the next election rather than actually looking to saying, well, how can we build bipartisan consensus around healthcare reform, around immigration reform, around criminal justice reform, around climate change, environmental threats that we face. There's so many different challenges that require us to be able to build coalitions and to build relationships based on respect. Unfortunately, that's a lot of what we've lost with these conversations, and the dialogue is really not even, it's not happening in a really meaningful way. I started out in early 2013, shortly after being sworn. I started thinking about how I could build those relationships. I started with the universal language of food. And I thought this would be a great way to reach out, introduce myself. I called my mother in Hawaii, who makes the most incredible macadamia nut toffee. And I asked her if she would make 434 boxes of her toffee for every single member of Congress. And she thought, oh gosh, okay, that's a great idea. Yeah, man. And I said, I have one more request. I asked if she would make another 435 larger boxes of toffee for the staff of every member of Congress. And she paused only for a moment, thinking, okay, it's going to take me a little bit longer. She said, okay, yes, that's really important. I agree. So she was doing this in Hawaii. I was in Washington. She started to handwrite notes to every member of Congress, learning more about them, where they come from, what committees they serve on, what their experience and background is, and then signing each one, just saying, I look forward to serving alongside you. And the incredible thing was, that I found, was how quickly after we started delivering these little gifts of aloha that I got a response. The only time all members of Congress are in one physical space together is when we have votes on the House floor. And so what I found was during votes, there would be senior ranking Republicans on different committees and from different parts of the country, probably I would never meet, making that long walk across the House floor from the Republican side to the Democratic side, looking for me and then just saying, thank you so much. I ate all the toffee. I need more to take home to my family this weekend. And then most importantly, saying, tell me what's going on in your district in Hawaii. Tell me what your constituents are most concerned about. Here's the committee that I lead, or here's the issues that I'm working on. Let's figure out how we can work together. Building that foundation based on respect is the most important thing to be able, for me to be able to be an effective member of Congress, to be able to effectively deliver results for my constituents in Hawaii. It's what has allowed me to pass it. I've passed the very first bill that I introduced as a member of Congress into law within my first year as a member of Congress, signed into law by President Obama before the end of 2013. Allowed me to pass important pieces of legislation and amendments around education, environmental concerns, support for small businesses, support for our veterans. And so this small gesture of respect, I think, really points to the kind of leadership that I'll bring as president. Reaching out to every member of Congress, reaching out to the leaders in both political parties, and immediately setting a new norm of holding meetings at the White House with Democrat and Republican leaders in the House and the Senate, so that we can have these open discussions away from the cameras, away from all the political rhetoric, and just really focus on how we can get things done. Because what it comes right down to, there's a lot of issues that we need to address. For example, things like healthcare. If you only watch news, you'll think there's no way possible for us to ever fix this terribly broken healthcare system because of the hyper-partisan divides, because we are so polarized. But if you are having the kind of conversations in your job, or if you're going to school, or amongst your family and friends, that I'm hearing as I'm traveling across the country, you're hearing, hey, whether you're Democrat or Republican, we share a lot of the same concerns, which really boil down to one thing. If you or your loved one is sick and in need of care, you don't want to have to be thinking about, well, do I have a $2,500 or $5,000 deductible? How much money do I need to have in my pocket in order to get that care? Is this provider in network or out of network? Is my insurance going to cover it? Or can I even afford to get the insurance to have this feeling of peace, this peace of mind and security that you'll be able to get the care that you need when you need it? This is not something that's just a Democrat issue. It's an issue that's affecting all of us as Americans. So let's start at that point, which leads us to the ability to focus on the objective. Looking at successful healthcare systems in other developed countries in the world who are spending far less on healthcare per capita, yet have exponentially far greater health outcomes for our people. The healthcare model I put forward is modeled loosely after the one in Australia and in the UK, two of the top-rated healthcare systems in the world that basically say, hey, we'll guarantee healthcare for every single American. My plan, I call it single payer plus. We'll guarantee quality healthcare for every single American, taking out the high overhead costs that come from big insurance, negotiating lower prescription drug prices with Big Pharma, recognizing that we in the United States government are the largest purchaser of prescription drugs in the world, therefore bringing down the cost of overall healthcare for everybody, while still allowing you the freedom. If you want to go and purchase supplementary healthcare, health insurance, or if you've got an employer-sponsored plan, there's something else out there for you. Obviously, you've got the freedom to do so. That will not undermine our ability as a country to ensure that every single American has quality health care. We can go down a list of many different issues where there is bipartisan concern, and therefore opportunity for unifying solutions to take place. Criminal justice reform, we're already seeing a lot of these great changes taking place through things like the First Step Act that we passed through Congress. It was not passed through easily, but it was passed because you had progressives and conservatives, both in Congress and out in grassroots organizations across the country, who were coming together and saying, hey, this is the right thing to do. It's time to put country first. Set the political differences aside and focus on actually bringing about meaningful change, which we did. These real prison reforms that have already made a big difference. There's a lot more work that needs to be done, but this is another great area of opportunity. I'm going to open it up to questions. We can get into climate change. We can get into immigration reform. There's a lot of different issues, but I want to hear what's on your mind to make sure that I maximize your time in answering your questions for the time that we have together. Go ahead, Vince.
All right, this gentleman was first. He beat all you, but
Hi, Tulsi. Great to see you. One thing that's never talked about is the Federal Reserve is paying daily $100 billion to unknown banks, which means we're very close to a blowout, which is going to be worse than 2007, 2008. So to solve that, we have to do away with one private entity that controls our economy, separate the big banks, get back to the national bank and use credit to build our infrastructure. And on the international level, we need a new Bretton Woods agreement between the four major powers, for starters, and the International Investment Bank to help out other countries. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll touch on a couple of things that you mentioned briefly. Look, I've been a long champion for bringing about real reforms to our financial systems and to Wall Street. Things like reinstating Glass-Steagall, actually getting to the heart of why we experienced that economic collapse on Wall Street that caused so much harm to so many people and families across the country. The going to the root cause of why we have not, to this date, seen either those reforms take place in a meaningful way. Yes, we know Dodd-Frank was passed, but that barely scratched the surface of getting to the heart of the problems on Wall Street. And the reason why it didn't go as far as it needed to go was because of the influence of big Wall Street's money in Washington. And how much of a corruptive and corrosive influence that money has when lawmakers are writing these bills and they've got lobbyists calling them saying, hey, this is a problem for my boss, this is a problem for our bank, this is a problem for our interests. And you see how the language gets watered down, and then the original objective and intention of actually reforming these banks, preventing another economic collapse is thrown to the wayside. And as a result, we're in a situation now where Wall Street banks are even bigger now than before when they were quote unquote too big to fail. And we're not seeing the political will present to reinstate the Glass-Steagall Act. Something that I've talked to economists would make a tremendous difference in ensuring that we get to a place where we're preventing another economic collapse that, as you said, would likely be far worse than what we experienced in 2008. We've got to audit the Federal Reserve. A lot of these decisions that are being made are not being made in the best interest of the long-term stability of our economy. I think there are tough decisions that need to be made, but too often they're concerned about short-term negative impacts putting us at risk for the medium to long term. in our economy. So these are things that I'm looking forward to addressing as we move forward.
Even Representative Tulsi, I saw
Hi.
a report at Nashville about 6 months ago in a church. But here's a question. Next year we celebrate the 75th anniversary of VE Day and BJ, and we still have troops in this country. We gave the Marshall Plan to rebuild Europe, and I guess Japan too. Now they're giving us economic to the point where even if you go to a military base, you probably see very few American cars. The Dodge, the Chevy, the rest are all Toyotas, Hyundais, Kias. So do we have to keep our troops there forever?
Thank you. I think this is an important question that has to do once again with really looking at what is the objective of our military. You know, our military, we all sign up to serve in our military to protect and defend our country, to uphold our Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I think that we are long overdue for an honest assessment of all of the troops and bases that we have, the hundreds of bases that we have around the world. Some may be newer, some may have been there, as you said, for decades now, and really look, are these actually necessary? Are they furthering the national security interests of our country? Or are they things that just exist because they've always existed and we've never really asked the tough question? This is something that I'll do as president. I think it's important that we recognize that by continuing to deploy U.S. troops to different countries in the world, especially if it's to wage regime change wars, toppling dictators in other countries, that this actually does not serve our national security interests. It undermines our security interests. It actually ends up, as we've seen in places like Iraq and Libya and Syria, strengthening terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. So why do them? Why do something that actually works against the interests of the American people? We shouldn't. So this is the change in the leadership that I'll bring as president in being able to reduce how much we are spending. We've spent over $6 trillion since 9/11 alone. Over $6 trillion that, just think, could have been spent on healthcare, could have been spent on investing in infrastructure, investing in education, investing in protecting our environment. There's a tremendous urgent need in our country, within communities all across this country. It's why I'm advocating for a foreign policy that will end this long-held regime change, war interventionist policy, work to end this new Cold War and arms race, redirect our resources towards investing and serving the needs of our people, and lead, not be an isolationist by any means, but actually lead as a force for good in the world, building relationships with other countries based on cooperation rather than conflict, getting out of this gunboat mentality of the past, leaving behind the zero-sum game mentality of the past, and really looking forward and recognizing that there is shared strength and peace in shared prosperity, and that we must maximize all avenues of diplomacy and see war only as a last resort. Sorry, I'm just repositioning her. I was just realizing I was looking at your picture. I probably should look at the camera, so. All right.
My name is Ron. I have almost same question with him, but little different. I believe when you talk in TV or anywhere we're talking, would be much better to clarify your position with military, because have a misperception that you could bring all the troops on the home. That bring in that idea that this country is going to be isolated.
Yeah.
So that is wrong.
Yes, it is.
That is wrong. Is danger.
Yeah, and it,
That
sorry.
way we should accept another Pearl Harbor.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I agree with you. That is, being an isolationist is not in the interest of our country. And that is the opposite of what I'm advocating for. I think that it's unfortunate that this assumption is often made, I think, because of the longstanding policies we've had that really makes it appear that the only way that our country can relate with other countries, engage with other countries, is by bombing them or implementing crippling sanctions against them. That's not the case at all. What I'm advocating for is really looking at our foreign policy, looking at where and when our troops are both sent into harm's way, where and when our troops are sent to work with other countries to make sure that it's actually furthering our national security interests and leading with an engagement policy, a foreign policy that's focused on global cooperation. We've got to be able to work with other countries, whether they be countries that are already allies or other countries that may have adversarial interests, to further the cause of peace, security, economic prosperity, climate change, counterterrorism, drug trafficking. I mean, there's so many issues that require us to not only work with other countries, but presents the opportunity for us to be a leader in that engagement, so that the good that comes from that is a positive effect for the people of our country and our interests, as well as for other countries around the world.
So, should we be, you and everyone who looking to be a president of this great country, should be more carefully when giving out their message. You, for example, last night spoke for wars that not needed, and you put in list together George Bush last night. After him, put President Clinton as you, and
Secretary.
no, and President Trump. Now, my question is, what do you consider a wrong word for Clinton?
To clarify, I was referring to Secretary Clinton, not President Clinton.
Oh, okay.
And what I was referring to was the long-held foreign policy view that I just referred to. Under the Obama administration, she was the leader in pushing for the regime change war, for example, in Libya, in Gaddafi. Obviously, she supported the Iraq war, but she really pushed with President Obama. I think she wrote about this, President Obama wrote about this, or other people have, that he was really reticent. He did not, his inclination was not to conduct that regime change war in Libya. In fact, when he was leaving his presidency, he said that Libya remains his greatest regret of his presidency. And it is a regime change war that has resulted in a total failed state. This was something that Secretary Clinton finally convinced him to do. It's resulted in a completely failed state, strengthening of terrorists who are finding strongholds now in Libya, a country where people are being sold as slaves in open markets. And it has actually undermined our foreign policy with respect to North Korea. As we're looking to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula to try to remove that nuclear threat from us here in the United States, the leader, the Kim regime of North Korea, points to what we did with Gaddafi in Libya and says, hey, how do I know that you guys aren't going to do to me what you did to him? Because what we did, our government did, went in and told Gaddafi, hey, if you give up your nuclear weapons program, we're not going to come after you. We're going to leave you alone. And then we didn't. Toppled Gaddafi. And the rest is history. To make a bad situation even worse, you have the Trump administration, as John Bolton was publicly saying, well, we're going to work with North Korea with the same model, the Libya model that we did with Gaddafi. So that, coupled with getting out of the Iran nuclear agreement, breaking that agreement, has directly undermined our ability to actually have, it's one of the main factors that's undermined our ability to have strong and effective negotiations that'll reach that objective where we can make a deal with another country, whether it's North Korea or others, that they know will be kept.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. And in my opinion, the problem is something that we need to address is that you've got climate change, you've got healthcare, you've got the banks. All of those are branches of a problem that we're not addressing, which is the political system. So right now, the political system is severely broken. And we're not addressing something like, I would love your response to a flat tax and getting rid of all loopholes, term limits. The reason that the politicians don't have the same health care, that don't have the same retirement, Social Security policies that we are. So of the people, for the people, and by the people isn't happening. Our political system has created a separation of the politicians to us. I respect what you're doing. I like a lot of what you're doing. But you're not us. And until we get you to be us, then we're not going to fix those problems. So if you can address any of that will get the political system back in line,
Yeah.
I'd like to hear it. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will be so bold as to say, I am us. This is something that I've been in Congress now for 7 years, came in the wake of the Affordable Care Act being passed. For example, as you know, there were carve-outs in that Affordable Care Act that said, well, it didn't apply to members of Congress. They didn't have to buy their health care insurance off of the same health care exchange that every single other person in this country needs to buy their health care from. If you're not getting it from your employer, you get it from the health care exchange. I was a strong supporter in calling out for us to fix that problem because members of Congress should be held to the same standard in every single way as every other American. No exemptions, no questions whatsoever. In fact, I would say members of Congress need to be held to a higher standard to make sure that I've chosen, as soon as I decided to run for Congress, I got elected. I got rid of all the stocks that I had invested. I had invested maybe 3 or 4 stocks a long time ago, but I didn't want there to be even a perception of a conflict of interest that if I'm voting for a bill that could directly or indirectly impact a stock that I had a few shares of, then that's a serious problem. I don't think members of Congress should invest in stocks for that very reason. On the healthcare issue, we were able to pass legislation that requires every member of Congress to get their healthcare off of the Affordable Care Act's healthcare exchange, just like everybody else. I think there are other reforms that need to take place to, again, make sure that that standard is there and that both members of Congress as well as senior staffers in our government, because this extends beyond elected leaders, extends to those who, whether they're bureaucrats or political appointees, have a tremendous amount of power. And with that commitment to serve, should not be allowed to abuse that power for their own personal or financial interests. By addressing these things, making it so that no member of Congress or senior staffer should be allowed to go and become lobbyists. Period. No exceptions, no 5-year wait period. You should not be able to traffic off of that experience and those relationships to go and leave Congress and go start making $1 million a year working for a lobbyist firm on K Street in Washington. Closing these loopholes allows us to close this revolving door of corruption that you are right, sir, that gets to the heart of how we need to get big money out of the core of so many of these problems that our country, our leaders have so far failed to solve, and make sure that the leaders of our country are actually directly connected to those that we're charged to serve. And there's a lot of other issues that we should look at here. I agree we need to simplify our tax code tremendously. Cut out the loopholes that are currently being exploited by companies like Amazon, by companies like Netflix, who are paying no taxes whatsoever. We have small business owners who are breaking the bank to be able to take care of their employees, keep the lights on and the doors open, and pay their fair share in taxes. This is the kind of, this is who I am. This is the kind of leadership that I'll continue to bring as president, and bring people together from different political parties, different backgrounds, bring together the small business owners, bring together farmers, bring together people from different backgrounds to get their input on what does a fair tax code actually look like? You know, what does it mean? Excuse me. So that we, the people, in a government of, by, and for the people is really a government of, by, and for the people, and that we don't have leaders in Washington who are living in this little bubble that's completely disconnected from the reality of the everyday lives that we are facing and that we're living. Thank you.
Congresswoman, on 7 October 2000, a Honolulu cop was driving drunk in the Malca-bound lanes of Poly Highway when he sped through a red light at the corner of School Street and crashed into an Iwa-bound 2000 Honda Civic driven by Dana Ambrose. She was 19 years old. She never got a chance to drink alcohol legally because a drunk cop sped through a red light and crashed into her. Now, and she was 19 years old, and so were you. She was just a few weeks younger than you. She was born on 28 May of 1981. Now, the message I'm hearing is that it's terrible if President Trump withheld foreign aid to pressure President Zelensky into doing something, but it's perfectly okay when Congress, that's you, threatens to withhold federal highway construction money in order to pressure state legislators and governors into committing a hate crime against people under 21. That it's terrible if a catering company chooses not to serve homosexuals at a same-sex so-called wedding, but it's perfectly okay for the government to use the long arm of the law to intimidate the same caterer into refusing to serve alcoholic drinks to people under 21. What is your position on that hate crime, and what have you done in Congress to eliminate that hate crime?
Thank you for your question. I think that some of the examples that you're bringing up, I would have to go back and look at the details more of. I remember seeing Dana Ambrose's name in the news. Obviously, anyone who is drunk, police officer or not, taking the life of an innocent person needs to be held accountable under the law. Again, no special treatment and no exceptions. Look, I think abuse of power is really the issue here. Abuse of power at every level of government, whether you're an elected leader or you're someone like a police officer or others who have a tremendous responsibility to fulfill your mission of service in whatever respect that may be. We have systems of accountability in place for that. Sometimes they are used appropriately, sometimes they are not. We have to ensure that the systems that we have are working to achieve that intended objective of upholding the public trust and the interests of all Americans in this country.
We have time for one last question.
We will take one last question. I can't see you.
Hi there.
I still see you. Little bit. There you go. Move a little.
Can you see me now?
There you go. I see
Oh, a
you.
little bit like this. Hi there. I would make you chicken soup. You know I would. International food. It's Laura. And we miss you here. So thank you very much for coming in any way that you can. You know I'm very concerned. I'm a mental health provider about the mental health crisis in this country. Particularly worried about your brothers and sisters in uniform and the staggering rates of suicide, and also the children who are too remote to receive services. What are your thoughts? What are some of your plans in that regard?
Yeah, thank you, Laura. This is an issue both with regards to mental health as well as with regards to the challenges that our men and women in uniform face, as well as their family members, that I wish was brought up at the debate last night. Because these are issues that are affecting so many people in a way that may not often make the headlines because of the ongoing stigma around mental health, but where the need is urgent. You know, as we see the rising, unfortunately, continued rates of veteran suicide, the continued rates of kids in school who are either attempting suicide or successfully taking their own lives, we've got to make sure that as we're talking about healthcare, we're talking about the care of the whole person, your physical and mental health. And just like you may go and get a physical checkup once a year or as needed when you're sick, like I am. I just went to the doctor earlier today. It's just as routine to be able to go and get the mental health care that you need. Number one, so dealing with the stigma. Number two is making sure that we've got the resources available. And I think you bring up a good point. This is a challenge that we faced in Hawaii, where a rural community has a unique challenge in being that you can't even drive 5 hours to get to the nearest city or big town and resource because you're separated by water. So you've got to be able to afford the plane ticket and the hotel room and everything else just to be able to go and get access to that care. So what we have been focused on through my time in Congress is dedicating resources towards delivery of that care through two ways. One is by having mobile care teams actually going and doing outreach in these different communities to include mental health care, both for veterans as well as families and children, but also providing telemedicine type resources to be able to make sure you have that privacy and that space to be able to have that conversation with a mental health care professional. We've also focused tremendously on dedicating more resources towards actually having mental health professionals in our schools, as well as more school counselors who are often that first line for that child to be able to determine if there are red flags or if there are issues that child is facing. I think that was one of the first things that I heard from teachers there in New Hampshire back when we first started this campaign. We sat with a round table of teachers and they talked about how some of the kids who are coming to school, they're wearing dirty clothes every day and they just don't have, for whatever reason, they didn't have the clothes that they needed and they were coming to school. And so then they're gathering together and trying to identify, hey, what's the problem here? Can we help get resources to the family to solve it? But really getting the community involved, whether it's donating clothes or having a community closet there for these kids to come and access, but recognizing that first line of defense and protection really is there in our classrooms and at our schools. And we've got to provide the resources to make sure that care is being able to be delivered. I think last, I'll just say in closing, and I appreciate the great work that you are doing. But the impact on military families of these ongoing wars is often overlooked. On Veterans Day, our troops are thanked for their service, but the sacrifice and hardship and pain and struggle that military spouses and children and loved ones go through is it's immeasurable. It's immeasurable. It's, for me, I really didn't understand this fully until I came home from my first deployment to Iraq. I was 24 years old, got off that plane. We'd been away from home for 18 months, arrived early in the morning, and we're standing in formation. All of our families were there. They were cheering and saying, welcome home. Our commander dismissed us, and I ran to my family. I was so happy to see them. Throughout my deployment, I told my parents, hey, I'm doing this mission and that mission, and we're doing this and that, and getting to meet these different people, working with the, Iraqi medical leaders and all these different things. I didn't realize until I ran to my family, went to hug my dad first, and I felt him sobbing. I had never seen my dad cry before, but he was crying these tears of relief, and that he could finally let go of the stress and anxiety that he had held on to for that year that I was gone. That every time that he saw a Black Hawk had crashed in Iraq or had been shot down, that he had that wonder, gosh, I wonder if Tulsi was on that aircraft. every time there was a new mortar attack or explosion, he knew where I was, that could be the hit that took my life. And you know, I just think this is something that we as a country need to focus on and to recognize that as we say thank you to our veterans and our troops for their service, and that we as a grateful nation provide that care to them, that care extends to their family members, to their children, and to those who sacrifice right alongside them. So as president, this is something I take very personally and very seriously, and I'll make sure that every single veteran and their family gets the care and the honor that they deserve. Thanks, Laura. Thanks for your question. I think it's a perfect note to close it out on. I want to say thanks to you all for making the time to come tonight. Again, thank you for your patience and understanding that I couldn't be there personally. We will be back there in New Hampshire in a few days, so we'll be traveling across the state. Hope to see you again. We are in the sprint towards Election Day. We have incredible volunteers who are working really, really hard across the state. I want to ask each and every one of you for your support and for your help as we bring our message to voters all across New Hampshire. I want to hand it over to Vince, who's going to share a little bit with you about what we're doing there and how you can help.
Thank you. So yeah, I'm Vince. I live in Nashua. I've been there about 7 years, and in April of this year, I got a call from one of the volunteers on this campaign asking if I wanted to come out and wave some signs. I don't know, many months later, I'm doing a lot more than that, but you know, my typical day, you know, I'm just like you. I get up, I go to work, you know, I'm a chemist, I make glue for a living, and then I do everything I can in my spare time to get this woman, to help this woman. Because I believe never in my life have I seen a politician that doesn't have that bad connotation, the cynicism that comes with that word, politician. I mean, since 2015, I think for a lot of people, that's really when she came on the radar. And, you know, since I've been volunteering on this campaign, I should say, I've met all sorts of people. I've canvassed with, you know, retired folks. There's single mothers, there's gay, straight, there's white collar, there's young people, students. I really see the whole spectrum, and the thing that they have in common is they see the integrity and the grit that Tulsi has for doing this way for so long. I mean, it's just, for a politician to do the things she does, it's very rare. So what we have here are called pledge cards. And what I encourage you to do is, you know, if you like what you heard today and you want to do something, you don't have to throw your whole life away, right? I'm still maintaining my life and volunteering. But the simplest things, right? You can talk to 2 people. If you can commit to talking to 2 people in the next 2 days, that's a way to help. So that's like one thing. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you can host a house party. We're always looking for those. And I encourage you, Sai over here in the back has a bunch of these. She has pens for everyone who needs it. You want to leave your name, fill it out, and then wait 2 days. And one of us will call you, and we will figure out how best to serve your skills, or how best to use your skills to serve our cause, if that's what you want to do. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Tulsi.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to say thanks again to the Hudson Dams Grace. Thank you so much for organizing this, providing me with this opportunity. I look forward to being able to come back and just visit you all again in person. And again, thanks to you all for making the time to come this evening to allow me to present to you why I'm asking to serve you as your President, Commander-in-Chief, and appreciate your consideration. Thank you all so much, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Aloha.